Okay, if we think about our next goal, and our next goal, for example, if we go to our create handler, then our next goal is going to be to add, when a user creates an activity, we're going to want to get hold of their user object and then add that user object as an attendee to the activity that we're adding here. So what does this mean? Well, we're going to need to identify the user that's making this request. And we know that that user, because they need to be authenticated to our activities controller, to the create endpoint, is going to be sending up their token. And we want to get hold of their username, for example, from that token or their ID, so that we can go and get that user from the database. But we're in our application layer at this point, and we don't have access to things like the HTTP context, where our token is going to be located. In our API controllers, we have access to this. So I guess we've got options here. And we could use our API controller to get the username and pass that as a property to our commands. That's perfectly viable. But I'd rather still keep our controllers as dumb as possible. And it would be useful to be able to get hold of the user's username or their ID from other parts of our application. And one way we can do that is by creating a class that allows us to get the currently logged in user's username. Now, we might want to use that anywhere. And for things that are cross-cutting concerns, then what we can use is an infrastructure project, and we'll use it for a few things in our application. We haven't created this yet, but we are going to take a look at creating this now, because we haven't up to this point needed anything that we might need to use in other parts of our app. So what we'll do, we'll head to our command line once again. Let's just clear the window here. And what we're going to do is create a new project. And at the moment we have 4 projects, not including our client application, and we're going to add a 5th one. So what we're going to do is say .NET new class lib inside our terminal or command prompt and say -n and infrastructure and press return. And this gets created. And we're going to add this to our solution. So we'll say .NET sln add, and then we're going to add our infrastructure project. And that goes ahead and does it. Now we need a reference from our infrastructure project to our application. So our infrastructure project is going to have access to our application classes. So what we'll do is we'll cd into infrastructure, and then we'll say .NET add reference, and we'll say // and then application and press return, and that reference is added. Then we'll cd upper level, and then we'll cd into our API, and our API is going to need a reference to our infrastructure project. Because we're going to add services inside the infrastructure, we need to add those services into our API so they're registered with our dependency injection container. So we'll also add a reference here as well. So we'll say .NET add reference, and we'll say // and infrastructure. So our API is going to have a dependency on the infrastructure project. And let's just clear this window. We're going to cd back up into our solution folder, and we're just going to execute a .NET restore so that all of our projects are aware of these new dependencies inside here. And now we have this in place, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our application project, and we're going to create a new folder in here called interfaces. And inside this folder, we're going to create a new interface, and we're going to call this iUser accessor. I guess it really should be called iUsername accessor, because that's all we're going to use it for, but just for brevity, I'm skipping out the username part there. And we're just going to have one method in here, which is going to return a string, and we'll say get username. So because our application project does not have a dependency on the infrastructure project, then we're going to be able to access this class via an interface. And inside the infrastructure project, let's remove class1.cs, which has optimistically put itself inside this project and typically gets disposed of very quickly. But inside here, we're going to create a new folder. We'll call it security, and we'll add anything security related inside here. And we'll add a new class, and we'll call it user accessor. And this is going to implement the iUser accessor interface. And we'll bring in using application interfaces. And then we'll go ahead and implement this interface. Now inside here, we're going to need to add a constructor. And what we need to get access to here is the HTTP context accessor. And let's see if we can bring this in from Microsoft ASP.NET Core HTTP. And we'll just call it HTTP context accessor. And we'll go ahead and initialize the field from parameter, just as we've done all the way through so far when we're injecting things. Now, all we're interested in here is getting the user token, and we have access to our HTTP context via this accessor, and our HTTP context has access to our user object where we can retrieve the claims from, just as we did earlier. So all we're going to do inside here is we're going to return HTTP context accessor, and then HTTP context, and then the user object, and then we're going to say find first value, and bring in system security claims, and we're going to look for the claim types and the name identifier, or the name, because that's where our username is going to be, not name identifier, claim types dot name. And one last task, we're going to go to our application service extensions, and we're going to add this as a service. So what we'll do is we'll say services, add scoped, and we need to pass in the interface first of all. So we'll say iUser accessor, and then the user accessor, and then we'll just bring these in. And the iUser accessors coming from our application interfaces, and our user accessors coming from infrastructure security. And with this in place, we've now got the ability to get the currently logged in user's username from anywhere in our application, really. But what we'll do next is take a look at how we can use this in our create activity method.